Morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're at. My name's Heather Capred. I work as an instructional designer in CSU Online, and I've helped co-chair the OpenCon Ohio Conference Committee this year along with Mandy. It's my pleasure to introduce Anna Mills, our keynote speaker. Anna has taught writing in California community colleges for 20 years and is author of the widely used open educational resource textbook, How Arguments Work, a guide to writing and analyzing text in college, and the newly released AI in College Writing and Orientation. Her writing on AI appears in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed, Computers and Composition, AIpedagogy.org, and TextGen Ed, Continuing Experiments. She serves on the Modern Language Association Task Force on Writing and AI, and as a volunteer advisor, she has helped shape the pedagogical approach of myessayfeedback.ai. And she currently serves as a prompting and communications lead for the Peer and AI Review plus Reflection or PAIR project funded by the California Education Learning Lab. I asked if you would please use the question and answer panel to post questions for Anna, and this will make it easier for me to find them at the end of her presentation. But please do feel free to chat. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored um, to be here and hoping you can see the screen. Um, so I'm going to talk today about the power of open in an AI era. So both how open practices help us adapt and how AI can help open grow, maybe under certain circumstances. Um, Right. And I think we kind of already did this, but I had the same opener of sharing your favorite drink. I guess we shared what you're drinking now. If you want to share I guess people have already shared names and where you're from, so that's okay. But if you feel like sharing your role, that would be awesome too. Um, and I am going to have some polls in the middle and Q&A at the end. And feel free to put things in the chat. I just put the slides in the chat, so you'll have all the links. Um, so kind of the inspiration for this and the foundation for me is a paper that I worked on in 2023 with Maha Bali and Lance Eaton about open educational practices and AI. How we respond to generative AI and how do we respond to generative AI in education? Open educational practices give us a framework for an ongoing process, and this is kind of my touchstone. This paper. Um, so first, what we were referring to with open educational practices, and we cited some research. The idea that it's not OER and what we're doing here is not just or even primarily about textbooks, but it's about the way that we share, curation and distribution of resources facilitated by crowdsourcing, open peer review, all these practices. And what's wonderful about them is that these are forms of community that cross institutional boundaries, disciplinary silos, and national borders. Um, And we emphasize that, there are a lot of open practices that are really non-traditional professional development. Um, we build our personal learning networks these days through social media, groups, blogs, through sharing rough. I think when I came to OER, part of what encouraged me to think that I could do a textbook. One, I could collaborate with co-authors, but the biggest thing was that I was offering something that others could build on, and it could be rough. I mean, it could be it was going to be as polished as I could and peer reviewed, but also if it wasn't everything I wanted it to be, it was an offering that others could build on and improve on. And so this sense of we can share things that are somewhat rough and it's still productive, I think is central to open in my mind. Um, and the idea of crowdsourcing, curation, and even creation of educational resources. Um, and so we made this case that these practices help us in the face of big change, in the face of the shock of AI. Um, they help us be more flexible. It helps us to be vulnerable and honest about our feelings, about the situation and our challenges. They help us to be curious. And so the idea was that these practices are agile, they're comforting, they're sustaining in the face of big change. And this was 3 years ago. And so I think what's funny is that it's not funny, but that the shock of AI isn't over. It's really something that's ongoing, that's going to be ongoing, that's going to involve in big changes that we can't even quite imagine right now, I think. Even barring anything sci-fi or over the top. Um, but we have seen a flowering of those open practices among educators in the last 3 years, and we need them now more than ever. Um, and I think that, we have a foundation for continuing that. So yes, AI is something that is constantly changing. Compared to 3 years ago, systems are more sophisticated. They work with and analyze all kinds of media, slide decks, images, video. They browse, they work with real sources, and we're seeing the beginning of this agentic AI era where AI uses tools well enough that it can function as a kind of imperfect personal assistant. Um, so the shock of AI is ongoing. Um, and I wanted to sort of give just a few examples of how I think we're seeing this really vibrant, open practice response among educators. Um, so one is on social media as a learning and community space that sustains OER and open practices. Um, and we all know these complaints about social media. I know I talked to, many friends who would just say, I'm not on there. They would say it's taken over by bots, it's commercialized, it's people promoting themselves, it's polarizing, they're trolls. And, those are real concerns. Social media is problematic. But there's also a tale of open practices and real warmth and resilience and community and collaboration, even on commercial platforms that are not built or optimized for those things. Um, so, there's a lot of curiosity, stimulating discussion. One example that made me really happy recently, I made a custom bot for a student. And this was a bot that tried to explain an assignment if the student was freezing up and not understanding what it was about. And I felt sort of uncertain about it. I felt like I think this is a good idea, but I'm not totally. I have some ambivalence, and I'm going to share the prompt and the idea, and I really want to see what people say. And I was just amazed by the way people pushed my thinking in so many different ways. And they shared parallel efforts and their own bots. And some really questioned the idea entirely. And they had great points about why, it should be about me redesigning my assignment. Um, and, maybe trying, helping the student, give up their dependence on AI. I mean, there were sort of many points that challenged me and supported me and, um, made me feel like part of a much more nuanced, rich conversation. And so, like, one example was Remy Kalir, sort of a legendary proponent of social annotation and many other wonderful teaching practices. He asked, should you design this type of assistive bot for students, or should I or you teach my students to query any large language model to receive this type of assistance? And I had to be like, yeah, I think that you have a point there. Maybe it would be better if I just taught my student to ask in a simple way, rather than making them a bot. And so that was sort of, that was not like me promoting that was a bit of a humbling response. But um, it struck me that more people responded to my posts that came out of uncertainty than to many of my other sort of opinion or resource posts. Um, so it was a bit overwhelming. There were 110 comments, and it was like, oh my gosh, how can I absorb all this and respond to folks and thank them? Um, but I think that spoke to that curiosity, the desire for authentic engagement that's not about self-promotion. Um, And I liked Jason Gulia is a wonderful AI and education leader. And I liked what he said in his blog about how his LinkedIn community informed his book, because people pushed against his assumptions and showed him again and again how complex questions about AI and education are. Um, so social media is one huge space that's central to me, but also private groups and blogs. So I don't know if you know the AI in education listserv. It's open to everybody. You can see the archive once you join. It's a wonderful resource. And also Laura Duman's Facebook group, Higher Ed Discussions of AI Writing and Use. It has 10,000 members now, but it feels smaller. It feels very lively. People do post anonymously. And I think in both of those groups, people are a little more free even than on social media to share sort of frustrations and uncertainties and experiments. Um, and I think when it comes to blogging, I think that's often also a space with the commenting where there's really warm dialogue. And there's just been an explosion of blogs about AI in education. Um, and some folks really are willing to share rough and to share vulnerable and to share, open questions, uncertainties. And so I just, put a few off the top of my head, but there are so many. Yeah. So I think, blogs, these spaces really are the basis for sharing many other kinds of resources across disciplinary silos. So, I think we have seen an explosion of professional development about AI, and often that's offered for free online, across institutions, and institutions are sharing what they're doing as Canvas modules, or they're sharing, opening up courses to other institutions. Um, One example of this kind of open practices, I think, is in this trend of faculty cohort programs. So that's actually a little bit more local. the idea of a community of practice where faculty have some independence in how they're developing what they do about or with AI. Um, but they also have some guidance and community. And Lance Eaton has put together a collection of descriptions of these kinds of programs so that institutions can draw on each other's work in that respect. And I've linked to that. Um, and there are so many. I I had Claude put together a spreadsheet, which is sort of a work in progress of PD that's OER that's been shared for faculty. And I think, it's a start. It's not an authoritative list, but I'll say more about that in a bit. Um, and then there's also an explosion of student-facing OER materials about AI, including OER Commons hubs and textbooks and many other resources. Um, so I think an example of, how I'm trying to live out this open practices ethos. I put a draft of my OER textbook, AI in College Writing and Orientation. I just put it up as a Google Doc because I felt such a sense of kind of urgency, like I want to share this. There's not enough out here about this. It's changing so fast. So I put it up as a Google Doc as I was writing it and kind of invited feedback, inspired by Remy Callier's book Annotation, where he had an open feedback process. And I put out the call for, just an invitation, please give me feedback on social media. And, that led to some people using the text or adapting it. And then also just people who incredibly generously commented in the margins of the Google Doc publicly. And um, that informed the development of the draft. Um, I think we've seen, wonderful sharing in curated collections and crowdsourced collections, like Lance Eaton's AI syllabus policy repository is just you submit in a Google form, right? And that has been a staple resource over the last 3 years for many people. It's cited all over the place. Um, on the other end, you have these sort of smaller curated collections like aipedagogy.org that have open licensed activities, and John Ippolito's learnwithai.org. Um, I think John Ippolito's is also crowdsourced. You submit a resource and then he curates it. He sort of vets it. Um, and sometimes you see the synergy of um, the listserv or group or social media collaboration with the development of these resources, even leading to an app. So John Ippolito of, I think it's the New Media Center at the University of Maine, um, he was leading these discussions in the AI and Education listserv, really kind of informally saying, I'm trying to understand more specifics about the environmental footprint of AI. And I'm trying to get concrete about it. And here's what I'm finding. But what materials do you have on this? And, is this accurate, what I'm understanding? And there were all these people chiming in. And he put together a page with all kinds of caveats trying to quantify the water use and the energy use. Um, and then on top of that, he built an app that just a very simple app that lets you compare the footprint of different digital activities like streaming YouTube or, generating an image. And that is the basis for, many student and faculty facing pedagogical experiments. Um, So, the last area I'll describe is sort of collections of prompts. So, as we're sort of building our own AI literacy, trying to understand how you interact with these systems, how people are trying to get more out of them, how they might be relevant to students or teachers' learning and teaching process. I think you have you know, this proliferation of experiments and the desire to share those. And so we've got all these collections of prompts, and I won't read over all of these. I'll just note that most of these are just collections of static single prompts. David Wiley's generative textbooks project actually envisions open textbooks as becoming sort of a textbook is a collection of prompts that each map to a learning activity for a student. So the student, has this and the prompts base the learning activity on maybe some open content. Um, so that's one model. And I think that's especially I think it's empowering, it's inspiring the idea that educators are actually really well positioned to know how to work with AI in the sense of prompting. Mike Caulfield wrote about this in his Substack that people who can break something down for students have an advantage because we can break something down for a machine. And that is what prompting is. Um, So, ideally, we would have better technological ways to share those prompts besides just collections. On this nonprofit platform, PlayLab, which is built for educators, you can remix other educators' prompts. You can sort of learn prompting strategies both through their training and by just looking at how is this other person um, using AI? What instructions have they given it? Um, and if you want, you can just use this link to join and try that platform if you want. Um, and I'm gonna um, hold up Mike Caulfield as an example of sort of open process, open practice. So I mentioned his discussion of prompts. Um, he has been developing a mega prompt um, for fact checking with AI, kind of to demonstrate a whole different relationship between AI and fact checking, and a concept of AI as something that we can use to push us toward better practices with research. Um, and so he has shared kind of radically on his blog and through YouTube videos as he builds this prompt. And Mike Caulfield is, he's a big figure in the field. He came up with the SIFT method, which is widely taught in library workshops across the US. Um, and he wanted to build a method, a prompt that was a toolbox for that method. The method SIFT is for humans, but he wanted to build a prompt that would get the AI to do some of the legwork of the fact checking um, in a way that, could support the human to sort of further verify and question more than they would have otherwise on their own, possibly. And so he shared the text of this whole 3,000 word prompt, which is ridiculously long. And I learned so much just by reading that prompt and also hearing about what he was trying, what wasn't going well, what weird things he was seeing as he did it. He put up a whole bunch of versions of this prompt. And you can see it if you go to his website. There's a little box where you can just copy the prompt and try it out in any chatbot. Um, and I felt like that was my course in, um, prompt writing, was just looking at his prompt and seeing how he structured it, what was possible, that, a system could respond to a very long set of instructions with a lot of if then. Um, so, that was just one example of another open practice. We're trying to do this in the pair project that I'm involved in, that I think was mentioned in the intro. Um, in this project, we're training faculty to invite students to engage with AI feedback on their writing alongside human feedback. Um, and we have a lot of materials that we've shared as OER as we develop them and as we change them. And that includes the feedback prompts that we've written and tested. That includes how we help students chat back to the feedback, and build prompting skills, reflection questions to encourage skepticism of AI and a sense of agency. And this kind of radical public sharing of works in progress really helped us improve our prompts. Um, we had a public webinar in July, and we shared the two prompts that we had. We explained how they were different, and we asked participants to read examples of feedback from each of these styles and to rate them and just describe their reactions. And it was pretty eye-opening. We ended up revising them further and feeling like they were much improved based on that kind of crowdsourced feedback. Um, and it's been really cool to see Open in action with those materials. Folks at the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Georgia adapted the materials and put up their own website about PAIR and shared that on social media. Jason Gulia wrote about his adaptation of it, and we've just seen lots of visits to our OER packet, and we're trying to build community on a Padlet and a Google group. So it's really giving up control, but also wanting to have broader community and dialogue around, like, are you doing something similar? Did you change that? Um, and it's very exciting to see that grow. Let me just peek at the chat, see if I've been missing anything, and put the slides back in. Okay.
Folks have been pretty quiet this morning. I think it's still
Yeah,
pretty early for them.
yeah. Feel free to put anything in the chat as we go and kind of
Yeah,
heckle me.
like
Um,
if other people have resources they want to share too, that would be wonderful to share them in chat. Go ahead.
Yes, I hope you will. I have a slide with a poll too, because I know folks have amazing resources, and I've been diving into the Discord and the lightning talks and going, oh, I didn't know about that. Um, so, sort of last point from this section is just that, I mentioned this agentic AI wave. Um, the idea that these AI systems are using tools a lot more effectively. They can be used to code, they can browse on their own, um, they can complete any activity that can be done online, they can take over a computer. And obviously, this creates new academic integrity concerns around automated completion of learning activities. Um, and it also creates questions about, what does AI literacy mean now? How are people going to be working with this? Um, how might educators benefit from this kind of assistance that's possible? And the privacy and security risks that come with this kind of giving machines these kinds of capabilities. Um, and so we've seen, social media and blogs have been like the place to learn what is happening, and podcasts I didn't mention. Um, so I think Liza Long is giving a plenary later today, and Joel Glad, I think of them as a duo because they collaborate a lot at the College of Western Idaho. They have shared some really brilliant advanced examples of educator workflows that involve Claude Code and Codex. Even if you're not a coder, this is my summer resolution is to try at least one of their workflows. Joel Glad has this whole system where as you're drafting, if you put a comment on your draft, you can ask an AI agent to go out and research something and, make a report for you and bring it back. So any comment on his draft as he works triggers sort of this agent assistant action. Um, and Liza has a plenary about making OER textbooks accessible in Pressbooks through an agentic workflow. Um, and she's also written in a really vulnerable and helpful way about what does this do to her cognitively as she's working with these agentic systems. She's written about feeling like a cyborg and feeling a sense of um, overwhelm and sort of new cognitive sensations as she sort of sees this multiplied capacity and tries to work with it. And I share just a couple of other, blogs with open reflections. I've been sharing slides from presentations on agentic AI, and just putting up, hey, here's how I got Claude to search LinkedIn more effectively for me using its browser takeover. Um, so that's lots of things I've just thrown at you. Let me ask if you are willing to share something about your own personal learning network, and where you turn or where you might turn, if anything here has sparked an interest to learn about AI in education. Um, and then what open resource or sharing space would you wish for that you haven't found yet? Um, oh, awesome, awesome resources in the chat. AI prompts for transforming OER. Cool, I got to check that out. Um, okay, so I'm gonna try to switch over to the Mentimeter to see as people. LinkedIn, surprisingly, right? I know I hear so many bad things about LinkedIn. People say offhand as if that's all it is. But I keep wishing that we could systematize giving people sort of credit, professional development credit for the time that they spend engaging meaningfully on LinkedIn. Um, Erin Tay, okay, great. Listservs, absolutely. Sometimes disciplinary listservs or OER related listservs end up talking a lot about AI. Of course, disciplinary conferences do have a ton of AI education. That's a traditional um, PD method. YouTube, yeah, University of YouTube. Um, Substack, Student Guide to AI. Is that from AAC&U? Um, I think that's what they call the American Association of Colleges and Universities has a student guide to AI. AI committee at my library. I love it. Yeah. So the local discussions, I don't want to shortchange that. Chronicle of Higher Ed, absolutely. Yeah, they do a good job. And Inside Higher Ed as well. So yeah, I didn't focus as much on journalism, but I think of journalism um very much like maybe social media is helping us discover the journalism as well. Um, Colleagues, yeah. um, Folks outside education. Yeah, that's interesting. Um, everybody's talking about it, experimenting with it, grappling with it, feeling uneasiness about AI, I think, even people who work in it, right? AI book club at my school. Neat. So Jane Stimson in MBLC. Oh, interesting. I don't know that reference. Um, so YouTube and LinkedIn and colleagues, interesting that those are kind of rising, and the student guide to AI. That's interesting that that's popular. Um, Teaching in Higher Ed podcast is a wonderful one. Yeah, I didn't mention some of the podcasts that I love, but that I was just listening to that actually this morning to get myself in gear with Bonnie Stachowiak, the Terry Gross of educational higher ed podcasts. So I've heard her called. Um, well, thank you. Let's see. Oh, it looks like okay. So if you want to elaborate and on any resource that you haven't found yet that you're hoping for, looks like people are putting things in the chat as well. Nicole Baker um, and Vince Granito's AI and OER Community Hub. I think I have that on my resource list, but I better double check. Awesome. I'm seeing all these links in the chat. Um, okay. So I want to share a little bit about ways that AI can help open, um, and then, have a final time for Q&A. And I want to acknowledge, first of all, that there is a lot of hype. There is a lot of and some resentment of the idea that it's all like, oh, it can do everything. It can ease all of our stresses, right? And it can solve all of our problems in open or in whatever field we're talking about. Um, um, and I'm seeing a question in the chat from Suzanne Joseph. In terms of reflections on AI, have you and or collaborators been involved in any data-driven studies that specifically address AI's cognitive effects or impacts? One of my students mentioned cyberpsychosis. Interesting, disturbing. I've definitely been, watching my learning spaces for discussion of cognitive impacts. And I think Liza Long's piece about sort of how much stress it put on her system to be, doing so much with agentic AI was really powerful. And I've definitely been watching, I think there was that MIT study on impacts on writing. Um, so I'm definitely watching that space, but I haven't been involved in studies myself. But our pair study is looking at what it does to student writing when students engage with AI feedback and compare it to peer feedback before they turn in a final draft. Um, and I think that's, it's a mixed thing, and sometimes the message about the need to set AI aside is very empowering. Sometimes with that kind of metacognitive reflection we want students to engage in, there's this freeing moment of, I decided that AI was wrong, and I saw even more value in my peers' comments, right? Yes, and my 15-year-old is also concerned about the environmental impact of AI. Um, so And I think that's part of what I hope we can do as educators is to honestly address um, the ethical problems with AI. And I think AI literacy involves sort of preparation for civic engagement in shaping AI futures. And so, that's one thing that I hope that we can that we can produce and engage in the with these open practices is just, less defensive discourse and less one-sided discourse about AI is great or AI is the devil. Um, and to invite students into that discussion that's nuanced and that maybe is constructive as to what can we do about it. Um, so one thing I wanted to focus on here is that I do think that AI could undermine open ethoses and OER. And so just to start with that concern, because I think what drew me to OER is the idea that it's really helping us make human connections. It's helping us kind of focus on this ethos of communication, sharing, helping, um, and relationship. So I'm thinking of, I tend to think of a textbook page as a letter to students, hopefully based on my experience as a teacher, um, and my expertise in my field, but really as me saying, this is what I find valuable, and what do you make of it? What will you do with it? With that authentic sort of relational sense of curiosity. And so I think we could lose that message of care and relational, context for education, if we're putting out materials that don't come from humans, right? And there's a real concern about a backlash. Students might perceive this as kind of it as neglect or hypocrisy if the instructional materials are made with AI. And there are a couple of newspaper articles that highlighted this from The Guardian in November. We could have asked ChatGPT, students fight back over a course taught by AI. Sort of, what are we doing here? If it's AI, we can do that on our own. Um, and this New York Times article noted how students were complaining on sites like Rate My Professor about instructors' over-reliance on AI. My 15-year-old was just complaining about this to me. Um, and one student at Northeastern University demanded her tuition back, um, though I don't think they gave it back. Um, so I think the perceived hypocrisy, the perceived sense of abandonment, even, um, or the idea that the instructor is phoning it in, that they're not there, there isn't that human presence, is really a danger. Um, and and I think we can acknowledge that and we can set limits and we can be transparent. So I really like Lance Eaton and Larry Davis's EDUCAUSE article. Sorry, I didn't link to it. I'll add the link later. Um, they note that integrating Gen AI into OER workflows raises questions about authorship, control, instructional intent, and pedagogical value. And it requires us to define the scope of what we're going to do with AI and decide where it's meaningful support for learners and where a human-centered approach should be prioritized. Eras Boskert, writing in the Open Praxis Journal, um, really emphasized this idea that using AI for OER shouldn't be about replacing human authors or educators, but of enhancing their capabilities. Um, it can create more diverse, expansive, inclusive, open educational resources, ideally. So what does this look like? And what are some better uses that wouldn't undermine that relational quality of OER? Um, well, Lance Eaton has put up this framework for using AI with OER. Um, and he focuses on AI can help us with curation finding and evaluating existing open OER materials, contextualizing, customizing materials for specific students and context, co-creating, building new materials with AI as a partner. That's where I get uneasy. Um, Quality checking, organizing materials. He calls that cultivate, amplify, publishing materials and promoting them, and then keeping materials current and improving on them based on use. So the one thing that I don't do with AI from that framework is, well, I mean, I don't fully co-create any of my OER textbook chapters. I'm actually not even using it for ideas or drafts or outlines of an OER textbook chapter. Um, and I've been tempted, right? Have used AI for other kinds of writing sometimes and disclosed that, professional writing. But I really feel like I want to be able to tell my students, this is my human guidance. This is mine. This is coming from me. But that gets tricky. There are gray areas. What about sometimes I'll use AI I'll say, here's my rough brainstorm, ask me questions about it. And I want it to draw out my thinking, but then it's influencing my thinking as it does that. Um, or I've asked it for a worksheet based on this OER chapter. And then the worksheet has new text, or it's summarized and emphasized certain things and not others. And I'm disclosing that to students. And how do they feel about that worksheet now? So I'm feeling out this terrain to see what seems appropriate to me to see how my students take it. Um, but there are uses that I'm not so ambivalent about. Um, and those really include research assistants. So, and I have a slide deck about this. But the idea that, that curation research is very labor intensive. I've been the a discipline lead for English for my state community college OER initiative. And that was many hours, right, of knowing which sites to search and thinking about the search terms and figuring out, OER Commons and Merlot and other repositories. And so I have found AI that can search and browse to be really helpful. Um, and then the other idea that really appeals to me is that it can help us convert from one format to another much more easily. So it can help us with some of that grunt work of trying to create OER for different learning modalities, of trying to create OER that are more interactive. And agentic AI is actually especially helpful for this because it can use tools, it can, make a slide deck and then revise that slide deck based on your input. So it can sort of work alongside you as an assistant a little more effectively across different software. Um, and I think that's especially helpful also for accessibility. Um, and, there are things that I will co-create. So problem sets and examples, that's where I'm like, okay, I can justify, coming up with more examples of this using AI and then labeling them as examples or coming up with sample text for a class activity. Um, and then I also will use it for feedback on my drafts. Um, so I did just want to briefly share this, what a workflow looks like in OER with this a wave of agentic AI. Um, yeah, I like Amandi's comment that Sometimes the best AI uses are the ones that increase accessibility. Yeah, and broadly understood. So, including universal design for learning and the idea of offering the multiple kinds of learning experiences around a certain outcome. I think AI does amplify our capacity to do that. Um, yeah. So this is something that I did involve based on my OER textbook, using these agentic systems that I'm experimenting with. So I started with Google's agentic browser Gemini in Chrome. It's now built in, so it can be part of your browser, opening up the little chat window next to your where you're working on your Google slide deck, if you are doing that. Um, and so I used that, and then I used Claude Cowork, which will work in a folder on my hard drive and make files and edit them. So here's what I did. I said I'd like to make slides based on the chapter on trust in how arguments work. And I didn't even give it a link. I just said it's on LibreText.org, suggest an outline. Um, and so Gemini gave me an outline, and then I started to feel uneasy because it didn't seem enough like that was mine. So I said, redo the outline using only text found verbatim in the chapter. Put the text in quotes. Um, and then I said, I like this. Can you make the slides? So then it sort of built these Google slides and showed them to me. And, I had the option to insert them. Yeah, I appreciate that point in the chat of using AI for research can be tricky. Absolutely. Because not only will it sometimes make things up, even if it searches, it'll sometimes misrepresent sources, right? So summarize them inaccurately or emphasize something that's not really the focus of the source. So yes, I do think AI research can be tricky and should be supplemented with traditional search. Um, but there are ways to prompt it so that it's giving you source, so it's making it easier to double check it. And somebody's also noting that I did say that the Claude co-work is $20 a month. So that is true, and that is a barrier. It's something that I consider a work expense at this point. But I will note that Perplexity Comet is the one that offers agentic capabilities, I believe, that you can still get for free. Um, but yeah, I think the expense is a concern, big question with this. Um, so, I think the difference with this agentic workflow was that, it gave me slides, and then I said, wait, I don't like the visual design. Can you match it to the existing slides I already gave you? Now check them for accessibility. Um, it didn't do that perfectly, but it did something. Um, and I kind of hit a wall with Gemini at some point. It was sort of glitching and not that effective. So I did switch to Claude Cowork, and I think that's the other big lesson for me is that it's hard to judge the capabilities accurately if you're not working with a more advanced model. So whatever system you're working with, if you have an option to switch to the thinking or the reasoning mode, or the more recent model, um, you probably will see better results. Um, but I think what was powerful to me was that I I was able to get a slide deck that was based on my textbook pretty quickly this way. Um, and I was able to tell it, check the text in the slide deck against the chapter. And it could do that using a browser. It could launch a browser and move around the textbook and double check and write code for itself to make a process to do that double checking. And it could narrate what it was doing. And And then, so it gave me a slide deck. And then I said, wait, I want each of those quotes, I want the citation to be linked back to the textbook to the exact place it came from, right? And it was able to go through and put those links in. Um, so then I went through an accessibility process, probably not as advanced as Liza Long's, but I was able to confirm with the PowerPoint accessibility checker at the end that at least it passed that checker after after applying various fixes to its own slides. And I didn't go for something that was like super amazing using this process or like obviously like wow, this is AI. It's this incredible infographic, right? That I could never have designed. I wanted something pretty simple and grounded in what I had written. Um, but it was able to give me that in a way that I would have taken me significantly more time to produce on my own for my students. Um, this is one of the slides. And this is just a little taste of Claude Cowork's task list as it was making this spreadsheet of that I showed earlier of AI about OER. Um, so it was going in and checking licenses and pulling the links, and I told it to check which of these resources is includes adaptations of other resources and mention those in the notes. Um, Sort the spreadsheet by date. So I'm just chatting with it, and it's cha making these changes as we go. Um, Now, I do want to say that disclosure to me is really key to keeping, let's see, I'm checking the questions though. Ha ha ha. I spend too much time arguing with AI agents and writing documentation for them to follow. I can identify with that. Yes. What do you think about data privacy and AI that's not sanctioned by the employer? I think thank you for raising that. I'm not using these agentic systems with my institutional accounts with Canvas um, because of those concerns. Um, and see whether,
Anna,
yeah.
April put a question about co-authoring with AI. Essentially, like, can you not give it a CC BY license then?
Thank you.
It's a
Yeah.
copyright question.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think on this slide, I just talk about how I attribute in a simple way by just acknowledging with asterisks which example phrases in my textbook were adapted from ChatGPT output and sharing the chat link. Um, but I think the concern about open licenses is huge. So again, circling back to that focus on open as facilitating human relationship, I think open licenses are there to help us value and acknowledge human contributions. And the US Copyright Office, has been pretty clear that AI outputs themselves cannot be copyrighted. And that means they cannot be licensed as OER either. So the pure AI output part can't be licensed CC BY or CC BY NC. But what can be licensed is what we do both before and after our contribution to that output. And that's sort of tricky. And I keep coming back to this example from Creative Commons of how they describe that. So this is an image that was generated in part, it says, by DALL-E 2 AI platform. And they said CC dedicates any rights it holds to this image to the public domain via CC0. So that's basically the language that I would use. Any rights I have, my contribution to this is licensed. And then I put the open license that I want. Um, and and documenting even with a chat session link or with some other labeling method like asterisks, what comes from AI and what is from me can help to sort of clarify what it is that I'm licensing. But it gets murky. And I think that's why they made this general statement of any rights it has. That's kind of that's kind of the option that we have right now. Um, and I did include some other resources here about attribution and FAQ that they put out, the Academic Senate for California Community Colleges and Affordable Learning Georgia has probably the most comprehensive guidelines um, on licensing. So if you're willing, I would love to hear more from you again in this poll on how you're using AI in OER. If you are, if you choose not to, what is your thinking about that? Um, yeah, and I think I appreciate Amanda's comment about in the case of that CC article with the image, choosing a public domain designation makes it easier for downstream users to reuse that image. Um, and Neil Voss says most AI vibe coders are using the permissive MIT license. Good to know. Oh, thank you for that example, Beth, as a way to acknowledge AI use of a declaration statement. I will definitely flag that. So 4 minutes left. So if you want to just put other questions in the chat or Q&A, I'll just share the slides if anyone is. Okay, yeah, there's a lot of space in the slides, but people have been sharing in the chat, so maybe given the time, we won't focus on the poll. A resource on this question from the Authors Alliance. Thank you. It may depend on how much human authorship there is. Um, let's see. Oh, wonderful. Shauna includes a guide on AI transparency from Campus Ontario. Thank you. Um, so I guess, yeah, the courts and lawyers will need to work through the details. Um, so yeah, I think the way Heather asks, I was under the impression that AI generated content makes data unlicensable. Um, well, I think we have to do that strange dance of saying, um, this was made in a hybrid process with generative AI, and I am going to license my contribution to that process, right? I acknowledge that the AI's contribution is not licensable, but the changes that I have made or the initial input that I have given to shape this output is licensable. Um, and that raises a lot of questions then about how you manage a world with things that have that kind of hybrid licensed and unlicensed status. And Mahabali has documented a lot of cases. We also need to be careful because sometimes the AI outputs might include material that is actually copyrighted, but they don't acknowledge it, right? So we need to also be checking that they're not inadvertently plagiarizing. And Mahabali and I did a chapter in my AI orientation textbook about this with examples of where you ask it to define a certain concept and it defines it in a way that could be considered plagiarism without citing the scholar who originated it. Um, and I think that, yeah, that's also a great point in the chat about concerns that the platforms are relatively inexpensive now, but they could increase the price later when we're dependent on them. Yeah, I think that's very, very likely could happen. I do think that, we're going to see somewhat increased capacity and open source options that are following. So there are some possibilities for local or open sourced AI that's almost as good, or it's as good as what we have now in a year. Um, and I also think that, $20 a month is kind of a lot, but it's also like if it's really giving me um, the kind of assistance I would get from a personal assistant, that's pretty valuable. Yeah, yeah, exactly. But we got to be wary of that kind of hook where it's free for a little while and then we're addicted. Um, other, yeah, questions or comments. And yeah, just I hope to be continued on Discord first. There's a Discord channel for this talk, and I would love to keep chatting in there if folks want to. And I think we're just kind of out of time, but I am very open to further questions.
Thank you, Anna, for all these wonderful resources. And I will save the chat to share in Discord. But please do like follow up with all the wonderful resources that Anna gave us. I know so much we were just questioning like the benefits versus the risks with AI, and we're just helping each other by sharing even like how to prompt and get the AI to do what we need it to do. So I'm so very curious about Claude to find out more about that. So thank you for your input. Okay, so at this time,